Welcome, everybody. We will be getting started in just a moment as soon as we go live on Facebook, everybody. And if you would like to help us spread the word on Facebook, you can go to the Disability Voices United Facebook page and you can share it there. Welcome, everybody, if you're just joining us. We will be getting started in a moment. We're just waiting to go live on Facebook, which you can help us with by clicking on the Disability Voices United, it's at Disability Voices United Facebook page and sharing.
And we are now live on Facebook.
Great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Judy Mark. And I would like to welcome you to our latest webinar of Disability Vote California. I am the president of Disability Voices United, and I am really happy to welcome you. Before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that we have a special line in Spanish that you can access. I will now like to call on Lorna Silva, our interpreter, to explain in Spanish how it works.
Para las personas que hablan español, para escuchar la interpretación, llamen al 551-241-6310. De nuevo, para español, llamen al 551-241-6310. No se necesita código de acceso. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So welcome, everybody, to our panel. We have a lot to cover in Disability Vote California, but one of the most important things that we talk about are the propositions on California's ballots. Propositions can be very, very complex, and we have two experts who spent a lot of time thinking about these propositions this year. I happen to love them very much. They are very close and near and dear to my heart. They are my daughter and my husband. My daughter, Emma Erenmark, has been working as a volunteer for Disability Vote California for the last several months and has written a wonderful plain language explanation of several of the propositions on California's ballots that relate to people with disabilities. And you can find them on the Disability Vote California website, and that website is disabilityvoteca.org. My husband, Alan Erenbaum, is an attorney who actually has written ballot propositions and analyzes ballot propositions for clients. And we asked him to join us so that we could get his perspective as well. A lot of things on the ballots can be, you have to dig a little deeper to find out what's really going on. And he has done that digging for you and for all of us. So just so that you know how today's webinar is going to work, what we're going to do is we're going to go through several of the propositions. And as each proposition is finished, so we'll start with Proposition 15. Emma will talk about it in plain language, talk about, what people who support it, what people who oppose it say, and then Alan's going to do a little bit more in-depth analysis. Then we're going to stop and take questions from the audience. If you have questions, there's one of two ways that you can ask them. You can ask them, number one, through the Q&A. You'll find Q&A by looking at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A and has two little thought bubbles on it, word bubbles. And you can ask it through there. That's my preferred way for you to ask questions because that's something that I can monitor easily. You can also ask it through the chat. However, the chat moves along very quickly. And so it's sometimes I will have to go back and find it. So my preference is that you ask it through the Q&A. Right now, we have a lot of participants. If we had fewer participants, I was going to let some people come on as panelists to be able to ask their question verbally. But we'll see how we go with time. And if we have time at the end, what I'll do is I'll let people come on as a panelist and ask their question on camera. What we're going to do at the very end, after the 5 propositions that we've gone in depth with, is that we will open it up for questions about any of the propositions on California's ballots, and Alan will do his best to answer your questions. So if we're ready to go, I would like to now introduce the amazing Emma Erenmark, a senior at Barnard College at Columbia University, who is taking the semester off to help with Disability Vote California, who will start it off, and then she will be followed by the amazing Alan Erenbaum. I know I'm very biased because this is my immediate family, but I hope that you will learn to love them as well. And so go ahead, Emma, you have to unmute yourself and you can get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma, and I'm here to talk to you about, about 5 of the propositions on the ballot. So they're going to be Proposition 15, 16, 19, 21, and 22. And after we talk about these, we're gonna have questions about all the propositions if you have a question about one that we're not talking about today. So I'm gonna get started. So first, I think what's really important is to define what is a proposition, because a lot of us don't know what it is. So a proposition is kind of like a law that the government passes, but it's voted on by the people, by the public, rather than the government. So how does a proposition get on a ballot? It can be in one of 2 ways. Either someone in the government, someone in the Assembly or Senate can put it on the ballot, or someone who gets enough votes can gets enough signatures can get it on the ballot. And the ballots pass if it gets more than 50% yes. We can go to the next one. So first, what I'm going to be saying is how, in regards to this proposition, how are things now? And how will they change because of the proposition? And what it means for the disability community. Afterward, my dad will talk about the people who support the proposition, what they would say, and the people who don't support it, who oppose it, what they would say. So for Proposition 15, let's begin. This is about commercial property taxes. Now, first of all, what is commercial property? That is property or land that is used for both large and small businesses, not houses, but businesses. And owners of these businesses pay taxes. The amount depends on, and right now, the amount that they pay in taxes depends on what year that property was bought. So if you don't know about taxes, taxes are when a business or someone who owns property pays a certain amount of money to the government, and they use that money for a lot of services that people with disabilities use every day, like the library and like schools, things like that, that are really important. They use the money from taxes to spend money on things like that, on public schools, things like that. So, and to clarify, this is an important point, is when owners of commercial property may not mean businesses. So we were using the example a few days ago of Bath and Body Works, which is a business that sells candles and hand sanitizers that smell good, things like that. They're in a mall. Bath and Body Works is not the owner of the commercial property. Someone else is. They are just renting it. So this, what this is about is not just businesses that occupy land, that use land. It's the owners of the land, which is different organization. So that's how it is now. What would Prop 15 change? What is it trying to change? The change is that these taxes, instead of being worth however much it was worth when it was bought, which could be 30 years ago in 1990, if a property was bought then, they're still paying those taxes however much it was worth then. And a little bit goes up each year, but it's similar to what the price was when they bought it. What Prop 15 changes is now it's going to be how much taxes is how much it's worth now, instead of whenever it was bought. So, and this does not affect people's homes. This is only for businesses, not for residential homes. So what does it mean for the disability community is that when these governments are going to be getting more money because these properties are going to be worth more now than they were when they were bought. So that means that the government will be getting more money in taxes. And remember, taxes go to all the services that we use as disability community, special education, local services, like regional centers, things like that, and libraries, fire departments. This is where the money can go to. So they're saying that it could be between $6.5 billion to $11.5 billion more dollars that the local government will have because of this proposition. Yes, that's, you can move to the next one.
Okay, so thank you, Emma. So what are the kind of primary arguments, the main arguments in favor and against this proposition? So the people who support the proposition say really two things. One is that it's not fair that different property owners pay very different property taxes for property that really is the same value, but the difference, they pay very different taxes just because one of the owners has owned the property for a long time versus another owner who just bought it recently. And there's no real good reason for there to be a big difference in taxes. If you're talking about business property, it gives a real business advantage to a property owner that has owned property for a long time because they pay less taxes. So that's the first argument, really, is that it's a fairness. It's fair. It's fair to charge everybody the same amount of property taxes. The second argument is that one of the effects of the old law, which is referred to as Prop 13, which is the law that put the limits, put the current rules in place, one of the effects of that is that local governments have not had enough funds in order to provide services. And there is a real critical need for more government services, particularly at this time. And the property taxes by business property owners are a good source of getting more money to be able to provide more services. So on the opponent's side, and by the way, the biggest opponents of the proposition are, not surprisingly, large businesses that own a lot of property because they are the ones that would be paying the higher taxes. But they argue that the increased taxes are going to be that they are going to pass along the costs of their increased taxes to others. So for example, they claim that, to use Emma's example of Bath and Body Works in the mall, that the owner of the mall, if their taxes are increased, that they are going to increase the rent for Bath and Body Works, and that Bath and Body Works is then going to increase the price of soap. And so everyone, all consumers, everybody who buys things are going to end up paying more for those things. So those are really the main arguments.
Okay, you can go to the next one. Oh, I'm sorry. We're not going to the next one because we're going to take questions. So there are a few questions.
Yeah, so let me summarize the questions that have come in. So there's a really good question in the Q&A for you both that that asks, is there any indications the revenue would be actually used specifically to enhance disability services?
So the short answer to that is no. The money is not dedicated to any particular function, but it will, I mean, I'm hesitating only because I believe that a certain portion is required to go to public education. But obviously, if the local government has more funds, then it's able to use them, you know, as needed, and that would then be up to the local government.
And I want to say something that I forgot to really emphasize, which is really important, and I know there's some questions about this. I forgot to say this. This is really important. This proposition only applies to own properties that are worth more than $3 million. These are not small businesses. These are not struggling businesses. These are businesses and property that is worth more than $3 million. So if there is, and I see a question about properties maintained by disability organizations, this would not apply to them if they're worth less than $3 million.
So I just want to clarify this. Is it the organization that's worth more than $3 million, or is it the property that's worth more than $3 million?
Property.
Okay, so let's make that very clear. So there was a question on here that says, might this proposition affect any properties maintained by disability organizations relating to vocational ventures and entrepreneurial businesses such as catering? So if your property that you are working out of as a disability organization is valued at more than $3 million, that is true. However, if you are a nonprofit organization, I don't even know the answer to this. I guess nonprofits do pay property taxes. Am I correct about that?
Yes, if they, I believe so, if they are the owners of the property.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so
right.
So many organizations that serve the disability community are valued at significantly more than, you know, they may have an annual budget of $200 million, but it doesn't mean, but a lot of that money goes to pay for staff or other kinds of services. So I just want to be very clear that it's only that property, if that property is worth more than $3 million, that you are working out of. So there's a really basic question that a person with a self-advocate asked, and I just want to make sure that we have that you clarify this, Emma. I can go ahead and monitor the Q&A, so don't worry about that. Is a yes vote for a proposition and a no vote opposed to a proposition? Just make sure you understand, people understand the term support and oppose.
Yes, so support means you're voting yes. Oppose means you're voting no.
Okay, great.
So when we say people who support, meaning people are voting yes on Proposition 15. People who oppose means people that are saying no to Proposition 15.
Right, right. Somebody just made a comment saying it isn't hard at all for a property here to be worth more than $3 million. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true that a lot of, large, even a strip mall property could be valued at over $3 million. So the point here is not to exempt, everyone. It's in fact to try to not to exempt everyone. The supporters would say, yeah, we understand that it may not be hard for, there are lots of property owners whose property is worth more than $3 million. But again, that it's unfair that they're paying a lot lower taxes than they may be paying taxes based on a value of $500,000, even though their property is worth $3 million. And that's, there's not a good reason why their property taxes should be less than the value of the property.
And I think this is as well is if you are a business owner and you're voting a property owner, and you're thinking about it in that way, that even if you have to pay more taxes, you should think about where could these taxes go? We don't know where it will go, but where could it go? It could go to a lot of really good things that may improve everyone's lives. So just to think about that.
So speaking to that, there's another question similar to that. I'm asking about where this money goes. Is will there be any additional spending to create a department that will be responsible to oversee and manage the task of enforcing this? If not, which department is responsible to manage this, and are they properly equipped to do so without spending tax dollars?
Right. So the taxes are normally collected by the county. The county has an office that today, I mean, obviously all property owners currently pay property tax, and that requires assessments of value because like for a residential, for a house, when the house is sold, the property tax is, again, based on the value of the current value. So the government figures out what that value is, so they know how much property tax to charge, and then they send out a bill and collect the money. So that system already exists today. Under Prop 15, there would be a big need for the government to go to all of these businesses, all of these business properties that are valued at more than $3 million. The government will need to go and figure out what is the value, because maybe they're paying right now, maybe they originally bought it for $1 million, so and maybe it's worth $5 million, $6 million, $7 million today. The government has to determine what the value is today, so they so they know what property taxes to charge that property owner. So the initiative, the proposition, has procedures in place and recognizes that there will be like a need for some increased staff at the county in order to go and look at all of these business properties and determine their values so that the right tax can be charged.
Great. All right, I'm going to move us along to the next proposition so that we get through them all.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about Proposition 16, which talks about diversity and affirmative action. So first of all, I think it's important to define what is affirmative action. So affirmative action is when someone is making a decision about who, in this case, it's schools and public job agencies. They are deciding who to hire or who to accept in the school. When affirmative action says they can consider and think about these people's identities, such as the three are race, gender, and country of origin or the place that they were born, when they make a decision of who to hire or who to accept into a public school. So that's what affirmative action is. Now, the way it is now is that since 1996, there was a law in 1996, there was a law passed that said no affirmative action. It's preventing from it to happen. So it means that when you're applying to school or when you are applying for a public job, they don't ask you what is your race, what is your gender, and they can't, and where were you born, and they can't really legally consider that, think about that when they decide which applicant to accept. So that's how it is now. Now, what would Proposition 16 change? Affirmative action would be allowed to happen now if Prop 16 passes. So that means that when public schools and public jobs are, when public schools and public jobs are looking to hire or accept people, they can think about what is this person's gender, what is this person's race, and where was this person born, and they can think about that and have a more complete or holistic view of the person, and they will be allowed to create affirmative action programs that can help certain underprivileged groups in these categories. So it's just race, gender, and country of origin. Disability is not one of these things. But people with disabilities are of all races, of all genders, and there are a lot of people, disabled people of color, who can benefit from this, and that it is true that disabled people of color receive fewer services, disability services. So maybe these affirmative action programs can help African American people with disabilities, Latino people with disabilities, that maybe they can have more opportunities with this proposition. Yeah, you can go to the next one.
So the arguments on Prop 16, the supporters say that there are disadvantaged communities that exist and that we ought to take steps to try to provide opportunities for those communities, and that we need to kind of, we can't just let say, well, the system, well, let's just let the system work and we'll treat everybody equally, because the system actually that exists doesn't treat everybody equally. So we need to take affirmative steps, affirmative actions to provide, to recognize that there are certain communities that are underrepresented and that we need to provide we need to see that, we need to recognize it, and we need to help those communities have opportunities to create a more equal society. What the people opposed to Prop 16 say is that Prop 16 itself creates a form of discrimination by recognizing people of certain genders or races or national origin, and that we should have a colorblind, gender-blind society where we treat everybody the same, and that was the reason why it's the same people who are opposing Prop 16 today were people who supported a proposition in 1996, which made affirmative action programs in California illegal. And they argued then that we should be we shouldn't see race, we shouldn't see gender, we shouldn't see color, and we should treat everybody the same. And they want to keep that system in place.
Yeah, and I just want to make two other support yes and no arguments that I heard earlier this week. So a no vote, someone would say, is that certain groups, whether it's racial groups or gender groups, maybe have now less representation, that have more now. Affirmative action may have them have less representation. That's someone's argument against affirmative action. Another one for it would say, which was an interesting argument, that affirmative action kind of already exists in some schools, in the sense that there are people who are athletes that will get into a school that may not have the best grades, but they're getting in, having special treatment to get into the school. There's also some schools that if your parents or grandparents went to the school, that you will have special treatment and acceptance in the school. So that these ideas of special treatment already exist, but this is taking the more disadvantaged, the communities that have not had as many opportunities in jobs and in schools, that they're giving them the opportunity now.
Yeah, well, I should also mention that people who have a lot of money also seem to get their kids into schools, and we heard about those kinds of scandals in the past year or two. So, so special treatment exists across the board. We have are you open for questions right now, Emma and Alan? Okay. So one question was, would this law be subject to the same kinds of litigation as the Bakke case back in the 1990s?
Well,
Can you talk about what that is?
Well, it's the idea, the question I think is whether this law, could be viewed to be an illegal form of discrimination. And I mean, the short answer is, of course, any law is subject to a lawsuit, because anybody can file a lawsuit based on anything they want. I don't think that the answer is I don't think so. My view is no, because this actually isn't creating new law. It's really eliminating an existing law. So it is really simply a repeal of Prop 209, which was enacted in 1996. And I don't think that Prop 209, itself was necessary in order to make California systems lawful. I think that it will depend upon how affirmative action programs, if Prop 16 passes, the state will have the opportunity and local governments to create affirmative action programs, and they will need to create those programs in a way which satisfies existing legal standards.
And someone asked, what is 209? That is the law that was passed in 1996 that made it so that affirmative action is illegal. No affirmative action. Now, this Proposition 16 is saying we don't want 209 anymore. We want the opposite. We want affirmative action to happen and we say yes to that.
A quick question, does this include religion and age also?
So no, this repeals Prop 209. Prop 209 addressed race. I mean, the words are race, sex, color, ethnicity, or natural origin. So this, and banned affirmative action programs based on those. Prop 16 will get rid of that ban.
Yeah, I should also mention that special treatment for people with disabilities already exists in law, and it was not affected by Prop 206, Prop 209, sorry, and so therefore is not affected by Prop 16. It doesn't mean that people are getting that special treatment and that people with disabilities are having any advantage, but there is that opportunity to have that advantage, and so they are not specifically affected by this proposition. All right, I'm going to move us along. So to the next, Prop 19.
Okay, Prop 19. So this proposition is about changes in property tax rules. So the way it is now is that, so first of all, this is about property tax as well. And if you remember from Prop 15, property tax is when someone pays taxes based off of how much their property is worth. So, and you must, this is, that was about businesses, this is about homes. So you must pay property tax if you own a home. And similar to Prop 15, taxes are based off how much the home was worth when it was bought. And it goes up a little every year. So right now, how it is certain kinds of homeowners, which I'm going to tell them it's not written on the screen, but I will tell you and I'll repeat it, is these homeowners I'm talking about are people over 55 years of age, people who have severe physical disabilities. We're only talking about physical disabilities, and people who are victims of a natural disaster like an earthquake or a fire. Right now, they can buy a new home one time without paying more property taxes. They can pay the same amount as their old house. These are all of these groups are people that own homes. They don't rent anything, they own a home. So these people right now, and they can buy a new home if it's in the same county without paying more property tax, without paying more taxes. And again, to talk about it again, is when taxes are paid, they go to government services. Like schools and fire departments and other government departments. So what will Prop 19 change if it passes? It's going to change that these groups, the people over 55, people with severe physical disabilities, and people affected by natural disasters, they can move 3 times, not just one time, 3 different times, without paying more taxes. They can pay the same amount of taxes up to 3 times moving, all throughout California, not just in their county. Taxes, also, there's another part that says that taxes will be going up for certain people who own an inherited home. An inherited home means that they got it from their mom or their dad or their grandparents. Now they own this home, and this home is worth more than $1 million. They are going to be taxed more only if they only live there sometimes. If they live there all the time, they'll be taxed the same, but taxes will go up for people who have inherited homes more than $1 million, worth more than $1 million, and they don't live there all the time. A little confusing. So how does this affect people with disabilities? So right now, this proposition affects only people with severe physical disabilities. So those people who own a home, they can pay lower taxes up to 3 times when they move. So for those people, this expands more options for these homeowners. Yes, and yeah, so that's one side of it. And then you can go to the next slide.
So the arguments, some of the arguments are the same that we talked about with regard to Prop 15. So just remembering that under current law, for residential people who own houses as well, if you're a longtime homeowner, your taxes are lower because they're based on the value of the property when you bought it as opposed to the value today. And today, when you move to a new house, your property taxes are based on the value of your new house. So what Prop 19 does is it changes the rules in, as Emma said, in 2 different ways. So it, in some ways, expands the ability increases the ability of these groups that people over 55, people with severe physical disabilities, people who are wildfire victims, etc., who own homes, can now, if Prop 19 passes, they can move multiple times and move anywhere in the state and move to a more expensive house and still pay the property taxes based on the value of their first house at the time that it was bought. So the people who support the proposition say we should, these are people we want to be able to move and buy more houses, and they should be able to take advantage of the lower property tax rates. Also, as Emma said, the provision, so it keeps taxes lower on those people, but it would increase the property taxes on people who inherit a home from a grandparent and who use it as a investment property. They rent it out to other people and make the money off of that. Right now, those people would still pay the property tax based on the value of when their grandparents bought the house, and under Prop 19, that property would be reassessed or revalued to what it is today, and the property tax would go up for that inherited property. So it's loosening it in one way and tightening it in another way. The people who oppose Prop 19, there's kind of 2 different groups of people opposing. One are kind of the anti-tax people who believe anything that increases property tax is bad, and so they say that people should be able to inherit property and keep that low property tax. But there's also people on the other side who believe that we don't need to, who believe that the existing law, which allows people over 55 homeowners with severe physical disabilities, homeowners who are victims of wildfire. It allows them to move within their county to a equally valued home and keep the property taxes based on when they bought their old home. That exists today, and that's good enough for those people. If we enact these additional exemptions to the property tax to allow seniors, for example, to move multiple times over their lives to very expensive homes and still pay the property taxes based on the when they bought their first home, that's an unfair advantage to them, and it's going to reduce the amount of property taxes that local governments receive, again, to be able to pay for services that everybody uses.
And another people who oppose would say is that the realtors or people who sell houses, they support, they support Prop 19. And why? Why do they support Prop 19? It's because they make money every time someone moves. And a lot of the time, people who are over 55, they stay in their house for the rest of their lives. And therefore, realtors don't get as much money. People who sell houses don't get as much money because people aren't moving as much. So they want to encourage people to move, especially the populations that don't move as much, because they want to have more money. So people who say no to Prop 19 would say that this is only because this is only because the realtors want to make more money, and it's not helping anybody.
Okay, great. Some questions for you, but I before I get to the questions, I just would like to maybe Alan to give an example with money here. Like, so I have a house that is worth $300,000, and I'm over the age of 55, and I'd like to sell it and buy a house that's worth $1 million. So how does, and maybe this is the third time I'm doing it, so how does this help me?
So let's assume you said your house is worth $300,000.
Right. The house I'm selling is worth $300,000, and now I've moved into a house worth $1 million.
Okay.
That I bought for $1 million.
The third time you bought it, let's assume that you bought your house for $150,000, the house that you're moving out of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if Prop 19 currently, when you moved into that $1 million house, you would pay property taxes based on a value of $1 million. If Prop 19 passes, you would pay property tax based on a value of $150,000.
Right. So I wanted to make that really clear to folks about that in that section of the law that would significantly decrease the amount of property taxes going into local communities. And what this proposition would do to counteract that is to say, yeah, but there's all these really rich people who've given these houses to their children and grandchildren through an inheritance, and we're just going to make them pay more taxes on those houses. I know I probably asked you this before, but some legislative analyst has decided that, in fact, in balance, it will actually bring additional monies to the state, which that just seems a little hard to believe, but have you looked into that at all?
Well, I mean, I've looked into it to the extent that you just explained. That it's of course hard to tell, but it is from the tightening of the rules on inherited properties that the legislative analyst is basing their their calculation. So it's very hard to know kind of how much this proposition would itself affect people's willingness to move and buy more houses. Obviously, the sponsors of this measure are the realtors who whose goal is for people to move more frequently and to move into more expensive houses, because they'll make more commissions when they help people buy and sell those houses. So the fiscal effects are a little hard to really figure out.
So to clarify this a little bit even more, there's a question in the chat that says, doesn't it just transfer the tax rate for the original value of the $150,000 and therefore the balance? Okay, so let's go back to my example. So you bought a house worth you sold your house for $300,000. You now bought a house worth $1 million. Would that difference, would you have the higher tax rate for the $700,000 difference between what you sold your previous house for and the cost of the new house, or is that tax rate for the whole $1 million?
I'm not sure I'm understanding.
Okay, so you sold your house. So you bought your house 20 years ago for $150,000. You now sell it for $300,000, right? Then you buy a new house for $1 million. Is that new tax rate for the full $1 million worth of that house?
Yes.
Okay, because somebody is asking, it's like, do you go from a $100,000 house with say $1,000 in taxes, then you buy a $500,000 house, the tax on the new place is $1,000 plus a new rate on the remaining value to $500,000. But it's on the full $500,000, whatever that new tax rate is for the cost of the entire new house, right?
You have to pay the property tax on the property that you own.
Mm-hmm.
And when you buy a new house, the general rule is you pay the property taxes based on what you paid for the new house.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's just that there are certain exemptions for that, and Prop 19 makes those expands those exemptions, creates additional exemptions.
Mm-hmm.
So do you, and I know this would require a lot of research, but where did this severe physical disabilities thing come from? There's a lot of things in the chat and in the questions. It's like people with developmental disabilities need to relocate as well.
Yeah.
Why and how? So how do you find severe physical disabilities? Do they define it? Not how do you define it, but do they define it in the proposition? And because it says severe, so does that mean? What does that mean? And why is it only that?
Right. The proposition doesn't even use the word physical. It just uses the term severe disabilities. So I actually had to do some research to try to figure out what that meant. And again, there's an existing exemption in the law for people with severe disabilities who move to another house, who own a house and then buy another house that they can keep the low property tax rate. So all of that comes from a prior initiative that was enacted to create that exemption, and that has been, the way that has been put into effect is that it does not apply to intellectual or developmental disabilities. It only applies to people with permanent physical disabilities.
That's just the definition.
That's the way it is
Yeah.
effectively in the state constitution. So that's the way it is today, and this doesn't change the definition. It just allows those people to buy
Move
more
free.
expensive houses or move more freely.
So it's up to you to think, that's ridiculous, because that's, I think it is ridiculous, but that's just what they defined it as.
Right. Here's a question. If you own and rent a home, but it is worth less than $1 million, does this affect the owner? is there any exemption for property worth less than $1 million, or it's for any property of any value, correct?
Yeah. Is this about the inherited home?
Yeah.
Yeah, this may be about the inherited one. Sorry, yes.
Yeah. So the
I don't.
again, there's if you inherit a home that's worth less than $1 million, then generally you can keep the old tax rate.
Okay. And I think this is on the similar piece of it. Does the property have to be of equal value currently? I'm not sure.
Yeah. So under current law, if you want the exemption, let's say since all of the TV ads have been about victims of wildfire. So let's say you live in a house that is worth $800,000 today, and unfortunately, it's affected by a fire. You can move, and you live in San Diego County. You can move to another house, and you paid $200,000 for that property 20 years ago. So you've been paying your property tax based on a value of $200,000. You can buy a new home in San Diego County worth $800,000 and still pay property tax based on a value of $200,000.
Yeah.
You cannot buy a $2 million house today and keep that old property tax rate or the full value of your house.
But that's part of the change, right?
Yes, if Prop 19 passes, you can buy a $2 million house and pay property taxes based on $200,000.
Okay, yeah, that's a problem. As somebody's making a comment that it's more likely that a person with a developmental disability would inherit a family home and be negatively affected by this bill. No help for them in moving with respect to property taxes. So I don't know if that's your analysis of it. So they're trying to distinguish between the fact that that this only impacts people with severe physical disabilities. So what they're making the point of is to say that a person with a developmental disability is less likely to own their own home and therefore less likely to be moving to a home that they're also going to own, that it's more likely that a person with a developmental disability is going to be inheriting a home. I mean, it's hard for us to make that judgment. Certainly people with developmental disabilities own their own homes. It's also very possible that people with developmental disabilities have a trust that owns their home. And so therefore it would be the trust that would be inheriting the home, not the individual. So it's a little hard to guess, but.
Yeah, let me be clear that, that generally if you inherit a home and you move into it, let's say it was your family home that you grew up in, and then you've been living in an apartment and your parents get old and they pass away and you inherit the home and then you move into that home, you don't pay, you can keep the old low property tax rate today and under Prop 19.
Yes.
Well, it doesn't change that.
Exactly, and that if the home is worth more than $1 million and they're inheriting it, they don't pay more taxes unless they don't live there all the time. If they live there, if that's their number one home, they live there all the time, this wouldn't apply to them.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, it is really complicated. And somebody, we've kind of gone over this, but I'll just ask it again. If someone buys a house at $100,000, sells it at $300,000, and then buys a new house at $900,000, then passing Prop 19 would be that they are paying taxes on the $100,000 where they bought the previous house, correct?
If they are over 55, have severe physical disabilities, or are the victims of a natural disaster.
All right. So thank you. So before we move on to the next proposition, Harry has chimed in on nonprofit tax law, which is very, very helpful, and says a quick follow-up on Prop 15 discussion that nonprofits in California typically have exemptions from property tax, but they do need to pay a prorated portion of the property tax if they rent out their space to a for-profit business. So that's good to know.
That means that $3 million property that we talked about earlier that was being used, that was being rented that was either owned by a nonprofit and used for nonprofit purposes would not be affected by Prop 15. Their taxes wouldn't go up even if Prop 15 passed.
Mm-hmm.
It's only the nonprofit owner is essentially acting like a for-profit business by making money off of renting their space to a for-profit business.
Okay, great. All right, let's move it along to the next one.
Should we answer, or we can answer at the end, actually. Okay, there's just one more question in the chat. Okay, Prop 21, which is about rent control. So first we want to define what is rent control. Rent control is when the government limits how much money a landlord can charge a renter or someone who rents the place that they live, either an apartment or a house, and says you can't charge them this huge amount of money. You have to limit or control how much a landlord can charge the person that lives in their apartment or house. So right now, a law said that local governments cannot do any more rent control. That said that they can't expand or do more rent control than they already have. So for certain cities, they can continue the rent control that they already had before this law was passed, but they cannot have more rent control. And the places that did not have rent control before cannot do it now. So basically stopping rent control for local governments. And throughout the state now, a new law was passed that said rent cannot be increased or more by 5 to 10%, can only increase this much. It can't go 100% more, 50% more. It can only be 5 to 10% more than the year before. So what would Prop 21 change if it passed? Now, if it passed, the local governments can practice rent control. They can tell the landlords, you can't charge this much, you have to charge this. And that if Prop 21 passes, local governments will have that power again that they don't have now. So what does that mean for the disability community? Is that a lot of people with disabilities use money that they get from government services like SSI. They use that to pay for their rent. And that rent control will help people with disabilities afford their rent. And that if their landlord will charge them a lot of money and they can't afford that, what's going to happen is they're going to have to leave their apartment or the home that they're living in, and who knows where they're going to go, especially now. So that it could help them, especially people with disabilities who rent an apartment or rent a house, that if there is rent control, that is good for the renter. It's good for the person who's paying rent, which is our community in a lot of cases. Yes, so you can go to the next one.
So, what supporters say is that we have a real problem with the cost of housing in California, and it's too expensive for a lot of people, and it's getting more expensive, and people are becoming homeless and struggling to pay their rent, and we need the government to step in and put some control on that to help people stay in their homes. What opponents say is that rent control is not really a solution for the problem of housing costs. It's really not targeted well to the problem. It doesn't ensure that the people who doesn't kind of match up. Rent control is placed on apartments, and there's not typically an income test for determining who gets into that apartment, unlike like a Section 8 program where there is. So you can end up with people who can afford market rent, the regular rent, being in a rent-controlled apartment paying less, and the people who can't afford it not being able to get in just because there's a mismatch of the apartments. So yeah, so
Is that people who are opposing?
yeah, people are
Okay,
opposing.
okay.
People who are opposing also say that this will provide less of an incentive, less of a reason for builders to build more property, that they may not want to build property if they feel like they're not going to get the regular rent. On the other hand, the pro people would say that's not a good argument because this does not apply to properties that were built in the last 15 years. So it takes 15 years. Any new property that was built would be at a minimum allowed to charge the regular rent for 15 years before they would even potentially be subject to rent control. And then also, just one of the other arguments in favor is that this proposition doesn't require any local government to have rent control. It's kind of like what we talked about earlier with affirmative action. It gets rid of a current ban on rent control and gives the power back to local governments to decide whether they want to have rent control and how they want to do it in a way which will help with the cost of housing in their communities.
Great. There are not too many questions on this one. So I think that a lot of people, just need to understand how, we talk about housing a lot in the disability community and how there isn't enough affordable housing for people with disabilities. One way you get to affordable housing is by creating some sort of control on rent through local governments. So as you're thinking about this from the disability point of view, you might want to think about those issues. One of the people in the Q&A just, I think, wanted to make the point that you have to make 3 times the amount of rent to be considered for the apartments now. So that people really need to understand that, if there's an apartment and you're going to be paying $2,000 a month for that apartment, your annual income really needs to be above, your monthly income needs to be above $6,000 just to even be considered for the ability to rent that apartment. And that's a lot of money for a lot of people. So, go ahead.
That no one, I think even the supporters of Prop 21 believe that rent control alone is going to solve the crisis in the cost of housing, but they believe that rent control can be one of the tools that a local community can use along with incentives to get people to build affordable housing and other tools to solve the problem.
All right, let's move on to Prop 22, which is
There's
basically
another question that says, would Prop 21 eliminate or supplement the statewide prohibition? It would eliminate it, right?
No, it would supplement it. It allows the local governments to modify their the statewide
Okay.
limit on rent.
Got it. Yeah, so it's not saying, you know, this isn't in place anymore. It's just saying that you can take that and change it. Is that what you're saying?
It adds to it.
Right.
All right. Encourage people. I'm not always checking the chat, so if people have questions, you know, try to put it in the Q&A. It's just a little bit easier for me to monitor that. All right, so let's go to Prop 22, which is where we're seeing a lot of commercials on TV.
Yeah. So Prop 22 has to do with rideshare and delivery drivers, which is apps like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, driving companies, or like also includes Uber Eats, people who go and pick up food for you and deliver it. Those are rideshare, and it's only talking about these people, rideshare and delivery drivers.
Right.
So there are two important terms that are super important to understanding this proposition. One is independent contractors and another is employees and how they're different. So right now, people who drive for Uber and people who drive for Lyft, they are independent contractors. So independent contractors are types of workers that choose when they want to work, where they want to start working and end working, and how long they want to work. They don't have to work 5 hours a day. They can work 0 hours a day if they or 1 hour a day, 2 hours the next day. They have the freedom to choose when they want to work. But they don't have a lot of the benefits that employees get. So employees are people who do have set times and places and how long they're going to work each week, but they receive benefits. And benefits are things like paid sick leave. If they're sick, they can still get paid. They get paid. A lot of Uber drivers wait sometimes for people to ask for an Uber. And so right now they don't get paid for any waiting time, but employees will get paid for if they're waiting, and will get paid for the entirety of a time that they're working and not just only when they're driving people. They get their health care paid for, things like that. So those are employees versus independent contractors. So what is Prop 22? What would it change? What would it do if it passed? So this is confusing, but listen, they would continue to be independent contractors. That is not that much of a change. There are some changes, but when you say yes to Prop 22, you are saying yes, independent contractors, no employees. So they are staying independent contractors if you say yes on Prop 22. And they will not become employees, but they will receive more benefits than they have now. So what are these benefits? They would have to pay drivers 20% more than the local minimum wage while they're driving, but not while they're waiting. They would have to pay health insurance costs for drivers who work more than 15 hours a week. And they will pay medical costs if a driver is injured while they are driving for Uber or Lyft. So what does this mean for the disability community? There are two sides to this. One side is that a lot of people with disabilities use Uber and Lyft to get around. And Uber and Lyft, they really want Prop 22 to pass, and they want to keep their drivers as independent contractors. Why? Because if they become employees, they have to pay a lot more money in how much they're paying the drivers and all of these benefits that they're not paying now. So Uber and Lyft are saying that if it does not pass, meaning if they become employees, that they would have to fire workers because they can't afford to pay all these benefits for all the drivers they have now, meaning that there would be less drivers or people with disabilities if they want to drive or if they want to have Uber drive them somewhere. But we don't know that that's going to happen. That's just what Uber and Lyft are saying. However, if the drivers do become employees, they would have more rights, like to form a union, to have paid sick leave, paid family leave, things like that, that a lot of other employees get. And they don't get these things if they stay independent contractors. So there are pros and cons for the disability community. Go to the next one.
Yeah, so just one point to add on to what Emma said is that the reason that Prop 22 is on the ballot is because there is a relatively new California state law that would change the classification of these drivers from independent contractors to employees. So the Uber and Lyft and the other companies want them to stay independent contractors, and they feel like they've tried to get the legislature to change the new law to make it work in the way that Uber and Lyft want, and they haven't been successful, so they have spent the money to put Prop 22 on the ballot to take it to a vote to try to get the rules written in a way that the companies want them to be written. So, you know, as I'm sure you've seen, the companies are saying these drivers should have more flexibility, and they're better off staying as independent contractors. The opponents of Prop 22 are saying that, you know, we shouldn't allow the rules to be written by these tech companies, that, you know, the drivers deserve to be, are in fact have been determined to be employees, and they deserve the benefits of being employees.
Do you want to, I can say, and something that Ed just put in the chat is that if Prop 22 is passed, that 7/8 of the lawmakers must agree to change back the Prop 22 to make them employees. It's going to be really hard.
Yeah, so normally with any ballot measure proposition, in order to change it, you need to change it in any significant way, you need the legislature can't do it. It has to be done by another ballot measure. That's why we have Prop 16 to reverse Prop 209 from 1996. That's why we have Prop 15 that reverses part of Prop 13 that put the property tax system in place in 1978. So that's always the case, is that it's very hard to change anything that is passed through a proposition. Normally, however, the legislature can make changes that are in the spirit of the proposition, because, you know, things do change over time and there is the need to make adjustments. But this proposition, Prop 22, was written explicitly to make even that virtually impossible. So whatever is included in Prop 22, in all of its details, we are going to effectively be stuck with for, you know, a very long time.
Thank you. So once again, everybody, if you would like to ask a question of our panelists, please put it in the Q&A, which you can find at the bottom of your screen with 2 thought bubbles next to it. There's a lot of activity in the chat, and I'm actually not able to follow it. And Emma, you don't have to worry about it because I'll do it. So focus on your presentation so that we can move it along. So let me ask you these questions. Will this law be retroactive at all?
I don't believe so.
Yeah. So this person has a specific example of an Uber driver being injured by a hit and run driver while working last year. And is it retroactive for them? This may be a personal experience of this individual. I'm not sure. But let's look at it proactively about how an Uber driver would be treated differently. If an Uber driver were in a car accident while they were working, if they are an employee or versus if they are an independent contractor, how would things be different for them?
I think they would, from what I understand, is that regardless, because of this proposition, like even if they are independent contractors, they will still be able to have their medical costs paid for if they are driving for Uber at that time that they are getting injured. That's one of the benefits that's being added in Prop 22. And I assume that they would also have this benefit if they became employees, correct?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I believe that's the case. I mean, I know that traditionally Uber and Lyft have insurance that covers their drivers while they're working, while they're on the app for the rideshare companies, and I wouldn't imagine that would change significantly if they became employees.
I mean, I know you wouldn't have the answer to this, but do we have any sense of where the Uber drivers are on this? Because I know that I can just tell you because I went on to Lyft yesterday to rent a bike, not a car. But I went on to Lyft yesterday and it said, ask your Lyft driver what they think of Prop 22. And so do we have a sense of where they are on this?
I mean, a real sense, I would say no. Uber and Lyft are touting a survey that says that 4 out of 5 drivers support Prop 22. I was discussing this with somebody else who said, yeah, if you ask the dolphins at SeaWorld, they would say 4 out of 5 dolphins would say they support SeaWorld because that's where they get fed and taken care of, but they don't know what the alternative is. And I don't know, I don't put a lot of stock in that because I don't know that this survey was in any way scientific or comprehensive. The drivers union says that the majority of drivers oppose Prop 22. So I think
there's a drivers union?
Well, there's an unofficial drivers,
right.
There's a drivers organization.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's hard to tell, and I think frankly, the drivers are I think if you could paint the real picture of what life is going to be like as an employee, that the drivers would then be able to express a preference, but the drivers are getting inundated with messages of the dire consequences that are going to happen if it passes or if it fails. And it's hard to know. I think it's just hard to know.
How much money has Uber and Lyft and Instacart and the other online delivery services spent on this so far?
They've spent about $200 million.
$200 million on advertising and other ways to advocate in favor of 22. Who are the big groups that are opposed to 22?
It's primarily labor unions.
And how much have they spent on this?
A much smaller.
Yeah, you can tell that it's smaller because you don't get to hear their side as much.
I mean, it's in the millions, and I can come up with that momentarily.
We can ask another question.
All right, great. Do you know where the taxi drivers are on this?
I don't know. Does it matter?
Oh, no, or somebody was just saying, I'm pretty sure the taxi drivers are against Prop 22.
Taxi drivers are against it because they are against whatever Uber is for.
Yeah, they don't like it. Yeah.
It's one of our favorite people, I won't say her name, is saying that as a very frequent user for years, every driver I know wants to be an independent contractor, and long before Prop 22. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
And
She is-
that we were talking with someone we know who was an Uber driver, and she said that for people who do it part-time, the independent contractor lifestyle is better for them because they may have 2 jobs. But if the people who do it a lot and is a significant part of their income, they would be better as employees.
Here's what I would say about that is that, I mean, I totally understand that perspective. And by the way, the opponents have spent about $9 million.
Versus 200 million.
Right. Is that, first of all, you can be a part-time employee. There's no, there are certain, as Emma was explaining, there are certain aspects of control that your employer has to have if you're an employee. But I'm not personally convinced that the flexibility that the drivers have today would go away if they're classified as employees, because Uber and Lyft, I'm just going to use Uber as a name for all of the transportation apps. Uber is going to need to find a way to make it work. So yes, the employer, if Uber is the employer, then they may have to schedule you for your shifts. But the way it may work is that they send out a weekly thing to the employees saying, what would be your preference for the hours that we're going to set for you for the next week? And then you put in when you expect to be available, and then they put in, okay, well, we're assigning you the following work hours, which are the work hours that you picked.
Right. And here I just thought of another thing, is that let's say you're an Uber driver and you are busy from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. If they assign you that, then even if you were an independent contractor, you wouldn't be working that anyway, that you would have started driving after 6 p.m. So it's the kind of thing that you can, as a person, your schedule, so you can set your schedule as an employee as well. And that it's the kind of thing where it's not like you just work for 30 minutes and you go away, because the one ride may be 30 minutes and you want to, and so if you're an Uber driver, you're going to make time to be an Uber driver a lot of the time. And so it just depends though.
Is there a minimum amount of hours an Uber driver, is there a minimum number of hours any of these ride share, delivery share drivers need to work in order to be considered an employee?
I don't think so, but I don't know. And what I also don't know is the broader question of whether there's a minimum number of hours you need to be a driver.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about that. I can tell you because we at Disability Voices United have to consider everybody that works for us an employee. And we do not have independent contractors unless they're doing really independent work, such as like translation of documents into Spanish, or graphic design work is considered independent contractor accounting. But people who are doing the core work of our organization, which is clearly what an Uber driver or an Instacart driver would be doing, is really considered an employee. And we have some of our employees who work just a couple hours a week. So I don't think there's going to be a minimum amount of hours, just based on my organization's personal experience.
For the most part, it depends. That decision is made based on the nature of the work and
not on the number of hours. That's really important for people to understand. Somebody wants to know, does this also affect companies like Amazon Fresh and Instacart beyond Uber and Lyft? And this is asked on behalf of a COVID vulnerable disabled person dependent upon delivery.
Yes, this would affect all. It certainly affects Instacart, because Instacart's contributed $10 million or something to this effort. So it's any of the companies that do app-based,
like Postmates,
DoorDash, that do app-based delivery. don't know about Amazon and how they.
Yeah, I think they're employees. I think Amazon Fresh, they're employees of Amazon.
Right.
I don't think they're independent. So just there's a lot of different kinds of questions asking similar things, which is basically aren't these companies going to end up passing on these costs to you through increased costs of delivery or of driving?
Well, it's certainly possible. I think the companies will continue to try to minimize their costs, but if there are increased costs, I mean, you have to remember that a company like Uber, I don't believe has made a dime, to be honest, despite the fact that they're valued at billions of dollars. They have been losing money since they were created. So, but yeah, I think it's reasonable to assume that if they have increased costs from this, that it could result in increased rides. But you have to also keep in mind that these companies' revenue is rides. They need the they do face competitive pressures from each other. Between Uber and Lyft and between other alternatives, and they do millions of rides. So you certainly would in no case would be talking about a doubling or 50% increase in the cost of rides in order to cover these costs. If you take the increased cost of the driver and you spread it across the number of rides, any increase would likely be very small.
So I just want to, Pam Haney just wants to say that delivery drivers for Amazon are often independent contractors, and many of them say it's an extremely abusive practice. We're just not, if that's true, I mean, I don't know. So I'm not saying that this is not true. That very well may be true. If that very well may be true, I'm just not sure if they are part of this particular proposition, because I haven't seen Amazon weighing in on it. Have you, Alan?
No. They haven't, and I would have thought that they would have.
They would. They have a whole lot more money even than Uber, which apparently doesn't turn a profit. So we are actually 2 minutes past our end time, but I know we've talked a lot about 22 because it's the one that's out there the most, but I wanted to give, if people have a question about any of the other propositions that we did not talk about today, I will give you a chance to do it in the Q&A. Right now, any of those other propositions on all those other kinds of issues that we haven't covered, including bail, including voting at the age of 17. What are some of the other issues on the ballot, Alan?
Well, we have stem cell research. We have voting rights for people on parole. Voting for people who are 17 in a primary. We have, not going in order here, dialysis, money bail, elimination.
Yeah. So if anybody has a question on any of those, please put them in the Q&A, and I will just kind of shoot through some of these extra things on Prop 22 and wait to see if anybody has a question. Somebody wanted to make the comment that Mothers Against Drunk Driving supports yes on 22, probably from their perspective of we want people to be driving. We want people to be taking Ubers and Lyfts as opposed to driving. Do you have any more information about Mothers Against Drunk Driving and their interest in Prop 22?
I don't.
Okay, people should know, and I am not saying in any way that this is the case with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which is a very good organization. But sometimes when you look at organizations that support or oppose a proposition, You can also find out whether they've received any money by the sponsors of that proposition. I'm not saying that Mothers Against Drunk Driving did receive any money, but we know that in some cases, certainly now on some of the other propositions and in the past, we've seen millions of dollars transferred to organizations or individuals who are leaders in the community, in certain communities, to take a stand on on some propositions one way or the other, and they're basically being paid to do it. So we just have to be careful. I'm not saying it's the case with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, but I would be interested in finding out if they received any financial contribution to take that stand. There is a question about dialysis clinics. Are they really going to close because of Prop 23?
I can't say. I certainly don't think they are. I mean, certainly not all dialysis clinics are going to be close if Prop 23 passes. No.
They will find a way to stay open, is your point. Somebody's saying Prop 23 will protect dialysis patients by making it a rule to have nurse practitioners or doctors on site. DaVita and other dialysis companies don't want it to pass because there will be more cost to their profits. Why don't we see more support in favor of Prop 23 in order to make sure dialysis patients are safe, especially if some crash when having dialysis? So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I do want to address that because, yeah, theoretically, it would be safer. Well, no, I shouldn't even. I didn't mean to say that. So yes, if somebody, you have to think about, I haven't seen any argument for why it is necessary to have a doctor or a senior medical professional on site at a dialysis clinic. There are lots of medical procedures where you do not have a doctor on site, including, in fact, you know, I've seen even hospitals that don't necessarily in the middle of the night have a doctor on site, but they have somebody they can call in case they need one, believe it or not. So if you go to a lab to get your blood taken, there's no doctor there. Now, is there potential that somebody there could have a seizure or some sort requiring medical attention? Sure, but I'm not sure. And in fact, in some cases, when it comes, for example, to the right to an abortion, the opponents of abortion have tried to impose these doctor staffing requirements in order, claiming that it would, you need a doctor on site, or you can only have a doctor with hospital admitting privileges in order to make the procedure safe. And there's not really any medical evidence that that's the case. It's really being done to put pressure on the provider. And so to me, this sounds a little bit like that. I'm not sure why it's necessary, and it will raise the cost, which these companies, and I'm not in favor of the dialysis industry is almost a monopoly. There's only a few companies that are in it, and they make a ton of money, and I'm not arguing that they should make more, but there's requiring a doctor to be on site would substantially increase their cost, which would likely substantially increase what they charge to insurance companies for providing their services, which ultimately means higher healthcare costs for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So what's your estimation of the impact of the effects on the passage? Oh, okay. So this is back to Prop 22. Hold on. Let me see. Are there any other propositions that you feel strongly about that affects people with disabilities?
Not particularly.
Yeah, we really tried to focus on some of these, the ones that we think have at least some impact on people with disabilities. I don't see any other specific questions on some of the other propositions. But just a couple of final questions on 22, which seem to garner like a lot more questions. than anything else, just probably because we've been seeing $200 million worth of commercials on television. What's your estimation of the impact on the effects of passage or non-passage of Prop 22 upon disabled delivery dependent people?
I mean, it's a great question. So this is my own personal view, is that if Prop 22 passes, that the companies are going to make a lot more money, because these are not rules that were developed by the legislature or some independent entity or business or organization or some nonprofit who was looking at good public policy. These rules were written by Uber and Lyft and DoorDash, and there's a lot that's in there. It's not just, well, we're going to classify them as independent contractors and give them a few benefits. I mean, there's a lot that's in there. And as is usually the case with any law that takes effect, there are problems with it. And there are unintended consequences. Either are hidden intended consequences that they didn't want us to discover, or there are unintended consequences that are not good and need to be fixed. And if it passes, we're not going to be able to fix them. At least not without Uber and Lyft's saying that they should be fixed.
Right.
So it's a little bit of the unknown. If Prop 22 does not pass, then the drivers are going to be classified as employees. That's going to create some level of upheaval of that's going to be a big change. There are going to be things that are going to need to be fixed with regard to that too. The sky is not going to fall. The Uber and Lyft are not going to shut down, permanently. They're not going away, but it'll shift back to the legislature, who will need to make certain adjustments to make sure that the services can remain and work, and that people will continue to be able to access them.
Great. So thank you both. Somebody put in the Q&A about Prop 15. Want to let everybody know we talked about Prop 15 at the beginning of this webinar. And we are going to post this webinar on the Disability Vote California website, where you can find all of our previous webinars. We are also going to be post, you can also find, everybody, that we have the plain language version. Somebody was asking about simple plain language version of the propositions. Emma, do you want to talk about the League of Women Voters?
So first of all, as Disability Vote California, we have a plain language guide that talks about all the propositions that we talked about today. And that's on the Disability Vote California website, disabilityvoteca.org. And you can access all the propositions we talked about, plain language guides there. The other propositions that we didn't talk about today are on the League of Women Voters plain language guides. Some of it was a little confusing, but it's a really great site that has a lot of information, simple information about the propositions. And if there's a way to put in the chat, yes. And also what Ed was posting about Ballotpedia is also good too.
Great, thank you. So thank you to Emma and Alan for joining us today. And we are not sure when our next webinar is going to be, but it looks like we will be having a candidate forum on October 26th at 10 a.m., which is a Monday. So we're letting you know in advance. where we're going to be speaking with at least one candidate for the 26th Congressional District in the San Fernando Valley, Simi Valley area. And we hope you will join us for that. Get on our mailing list by going to disabilityvoteca.org or to our organization, disabilityvoicesunited.org, and you can join our mailing list to be alerted about all future webinars. So thank you, everybody, once again, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Oh, wait, I should really say something. Don't forget to vote. Voting is happening now. You need to vote. If voter registration has a preliminary deadline of October 19th in 3 days. If you have not registered to vote and you go online to vote before the 19th or by the 19th, you will be able to get your vote by mail ballot sent to you. After the 19th, they can't guarantee you're going to get that vote by mail ballot. However, you will still be able to vote. You will be able to vote in person on election day or early for the early vote. So the number one thing that we are telling everybody is that you need to vote, you need to vote.
And yes, and especially registering to vote, you have to do it before Monday. Do it today if you're not registered. And you can go to vote.gov. I'm pretty sure it's vote.gov. That you can check if you are registered and if you're not sure. And Ed put in the chat, register to vote.ca.gov is how to register to vote. It takes 1 minute. It's very fast. And that vote, you can begin voting early by October 24th. So make sure that you're voting today. You're getting all the information that you can so that you can mail your ballot or turn your ballot in person or vote in person in the next week to the next couple weeks.
Great. So thank you, everybody. Take care. Be safe out there. Bye-bye.